with you.
It's wonderful to have you back on after an incredibly busy week. I again have to start with Minnesota, Senator, and I want to put this into broader context because, of course, these acts of political violence have been increasing. We recently saw the arson attack against Pennsylvania's Governor Josh Shapiro. We saw that kidnapping plot against Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer, the two assassination attempts against President Trump, Senator. What role can lawmakers play in trying to end these horrific acts of political violence?
I think you're right. We have seen over the last 8 or 10 years this proliferation of political violence against members of both parties. And I think one thing that has really contributed to it is the coarsening of the political dialogue, the way that people refer to their political opponents, the ad hominem nature of the attacks, the flirtation with violence, and some of the things, for example, that the president says, they, I think, are an encouragement to these reprehensible acts. We all have to acknowledge on both sides of the aisle the need to bring about a more civil discourse, but the need to condemn political violence, no matter who the target is. And I think one of the things that really hits home here about these latest attacks is those of us that choose to enter public service sadly understand the risks that we are taking now, but those risks and that acceptance is on our own part. And now you see the murder and attempted murder of the spouses or family members of electeds, and that just brings it home literally in a very different way.
It absolutely does, Senator. There's no doubt about that. I do want to turn to really the extraordinary events that we witnessed in California this week. I'll pick up with you on where I ended with Senator Rand Paul. The fact that your colleague, Senator Alex Padilla, was basically tussled to the ground, handcuffed after he had approached the podium of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. He was forcibly removed. Secretary Noem called this political theater. As I just said, Speaker Johnson called for him to be censured. What say you to that argument that this was nothing more than political theater?
Well, first of all, I think it's important for people to realize that he was escorted into that press conference. The door was open. He was escorted in by law enforcement. He identified himself. He tried to ask the secretary a question, a secretary who clearly doesn't want to answer questions about the lawless acts of the Department of Homeland Security that we are seeing in Los Angeles. So he had every right to do so. That's part of his oversight responsibilities. And to be treated that way and to be responded to by saying, oh, we didn't know who you are, when it was literally written on his shirt or his jacket when he's proclaiming who he is, I don't buy it. And for those of us that know Alex, and it would be hard-pressed to find a more beloved senator on either side of the aisle, respected by members on both sides of the aisle, you know, for his intellect, for his demeanor, this is not some rabble-rouser. And to see him mistreated that way and tackled to the ground and shackled that way, and in the midst of what we're seeing more broadly in Los Angeles, is just atrocious. And I think all of us that work with him reacted with that kind of revulsion. But sadly, this is kind of the direction the administration is taking things, with the mass deportations, with the calling out of the military in violation of the law. We are just degenerating in terms of how laws are broken in this country.
Very quickly, Senator, do you think he could have been more effective if he had, for example, asked for a meeting with Secretary Noem? Do you support the way he went about this?
Oh, I think he has asked for meetings and he has asked for briefings. And of course, we don't see any kind of responsiveness to the administration. And it's our constituents in California that are being the subject of a lawless use of the military. In California, we cherish our National Guard. They're the first there to help out during earthquakes and floods and fires. We have a very special bond of trust with the National Guard. And so to see it misused this way, to potentially erode that trust. We also venerate the Marines, but to call in the Marines for no other reason, I think, than to add fuel to the fire is a terrible abuse of the military.
So, Senator, let me ask you about that. President Trump's decision to deploy the National Guard, the Marines, despite the fact that California Governor Gavin Newsom said he did not need that, did not want that. President Trump said the city would have, quote, burned to the ground without his aid. Do you think local officials had that situation under control?
Yes, I do. And, let's call the president's statement what it is. And that's just a flat out lie. The idea that Los Angeles would have burnt to the ground, it's absurd. These demonstrations were taking place in a multi-block area in a city that is 500 square miles. Our police and our sheriff's office and our highway patrol are more than capable of dealing with this. And if they won't, and they weren't, then the mayor and the governor would request the help of our guard. That was not done. It was not necessary. And I think this is just Donald Trump doing what he wanted to do in the first administration, which was essentially use the military for domestic law enforcement to make himself look tough. In the first administration, there were at least a few people in the cabinet of some independents who could say, no, Mr. President, that's a lawless idea. That's a stupid idea. But there's no one in this current administration to tell the president that's a stupid idea. It will make matters worse. And there are nothing but sycophants, the Stephen Millers and the Kristi Noems and all the rest of them. And so we are seeing this terrible escalation, this increasing lawlessness. The district court was right to find it lawless. Now that Marines are engaged in an arrest, at least one arrest and detention, then that will be challenged too. And I think that too will be found to be lawless.
All right. And of course, we'll track those court developments very closely. I do want to turn to the Middle East and what Israel calls its preemptive strike on Iran. It's an active situation, Senator, as we're having this conversation. Of course, Israel's actions met by Iran's retaliation, which has dramatically raised fears about the possibility of a wider war. Would you support the U.S. military assisting in taking additional actions against Iran's nuclear sites?
Well, first of all, I think Israel has a right to defend itself, and I support what Israel is doing to defend itself. Israel clearly made the calculus that at a moment when Iran has been weakened by the incapacity of its militia, of Hezbollah and its other actors, the state-sponsored terrorism that engaged in once it's been weakened, I think they found this the opportune moment to go after a nuclear program that was coming closer and closer to fruition. So I support those actions, and I support the administration's actions in helping Israel defend itself. In terms of whether the administration should go further and engage in direct hostilities against Iran, that's not something I support. Now, I have to caveat that by saying I have not been able to get recently an intelligence briefing on whether Iran is trying to break out to get a bomb. But I think the United States should be very loath to engage in another war after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there should be a very high hurdle to get over before essentially going to direct war with Iran. So defensive support for Israel, yes. In the absence, in my view, of seeing more compelling evidence that this is in the imminent national security needs of the United States, I wouldn't go beyond defensive support. But I want to make sure we're doing everything we can to help Israel protect itself against these incoming missiles, projectiles, drones, and other attacks.
And Senator Schiff, as you know, President Trump issued that stern warning to Iran not to hit U.S. targets. Let me ask you, would your calculation change if Iran were to hit U.S. targets in the region? Would you then condone the United States getting involved?
Yes, if Iran attacks the United States, when the administration has made it very clear that we have not been part of the offensive operations against Iran, if they should respond by attacking us, then we should respond by defending ourselves. And then I think Iran opens itself up to potential attacks on Fordow or elsewhere. So I second the president's statement that Iran must not attack the United States, our forces, our people, or our interests.
All right. Senator Adam Schiff covered a lot of ground today. Thank you so much, and happy Father's Day to you. Hope you have a great day.